Let's kick off with the major story that has been in the news, which is about the flood, the flood alert, which is coming from the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, has warned Nigerians to expect floods in 9 states due to release of water for Cameroon's Lagdo Dam. This is becoming an annual thing, a situation where Cameroon authority will have to release water from one of the largest dams in that country. And one will expect that, okay, if this is going to happen, it's going to get better, year by year. But you just discover that the situation has been the same, Of interest is the fact that the one is coming early this time around. A month ago, the flood alert was issued for Nigerian authority to prepare. We share borders, we share borders with Cameroon. And this time around, the alert is coming so early for Nigeria to prepare. Sam, what kind of preparation do you expect the Nigeria authority to put in place in order to mitigate this kind of occurrence?
Thank you very much, Femi. I think this issue has become a recurring decimal. But if you look at it from disaster risk management approach, it's not just sufficient to just warn people that the water will be released from the dam in Cameroon. What are the preparedness in terms of actual emergency? What are the key elements, preparation that has been made to forestall when the water is released, particularly the impact it has in over 9 states of the Federation? So I think NEMA should be more proactive in terms of disaster risk management. It should operationalize ways in which they can reduce the flood and partner with states, state emergency agencies, so that the impact of this water that is released from Cameroon does not impact us negatively. Good that they are informing us on time, but then they could be more proactive and putting mitigation processes in place to reduce the impact. I think that is when we will appreciate the work of NEMA.
Well, I think that this problem, I don't see it as one that the government is planning to ever deal with, because I recall the incident of 2012 when water was also released from the Lagdo Dam, and we could see the impact on states that were around the River Niger borders, how impacted they were. At that time, I was in a number of states, and a lot of cities were severely affected, and those cities were the food basket of the states. So it was terrible in them. And at that time, we had President Goodluck Jonathan. I recall that he went to the construction site where a dam that would receive water when the water from Lagdo Dam is released. And then he asked when it would be completed. He said 2013. This is several years down the line, and nothing is being done. And every time there's a warning from Cameroon, NEMA says, oh, water is coming, people prepare. To do what? If you ask them to evacuate, to where? Because I remember at that time, schools were used as evacuation camps, and you could see the deplorable conditions in which those schools were. The uninhabitable conditions that families were exposed to. Some families were even living on the roadside because their homes were taken over by flood. So it was really a sad situation. One would have thought that after that, serious plans would have been made to ensure that when water is released from Cameroon Lagdo Dam, it goes straight to another dam that receives the water, instead of people being warned every year, oh, water is coming, move to where? Move to where, I ask again.
It's obvious, this is due to lack of preparation. If you look at the states that are going to be affected, Adamawa, Taraba, Benue, Nasarawa, Kogi, Anambra, Edo, Delta, and Bayelsa. It's an annual thing, and one will expect that more action will have been taken to prepare for this. To note of, this dam was built in 1982, and this arrangement between the Cameroon authority and Nigeria authority has been in place. Now, the missing link now is the dam you talk about, the buffer dam, that should be like, once the water is released, there is released into the dam at the Nigerian side of the bargain. But you discover that has been in pipeline for years. Several administrations have come on board, but that dam has been neglected. As we speak, nothing is being done to improve that dam. So it's not an occurrence coming from this not as a result of climate change now.
Yes.
So it makes it predictable. If something that happens periodically, it happens every year. So the arrangement should have been made to have this buffer dam that can accommodate this water once they are being released, and it has to be done in those several states. But this project has been neglected over the years, and that's why you keep having this issue. Even if you have people to relocate, how many people will be able to relocate? Of course, one could say the alternative, what could be done is for people to relocate from lowland to island.
Where is the highland?
Where is it? And then, like you said, most of the schools, students ought to be in session, they ought to be in school, but most of these schools now will be used as, relief centers and all that. So it boils down to lack of preparation, and they need to not just be reacting after the thing has been done, but to be proactive for this thing to be mitigated. Since it's an annual thing, it's predictable. And so it calls for more action on the part
And I think government will be saving itself a lot of money, because at this time, money will be channeled to getting relief materials for those that will be affected. Even though when we see the relief materials, sometimes we're trying to equate with the money that was disbursed, there's a huge gap.
This thing happened last year, and the studies shows that about 1.5 million people were affected last year. In fact, interesting, around this period, I was in Kogi State, so I witnessed it. In fact, I had to stay in Abuja, return to Abuja. I had to stay for another 1 week for that thing to subside. So once that thing happens, it affects virtually every state around that axis, about 9 to 10 states. And what we expect that if this happens annually, then the right preparation could have put in place.
You could imagine the economic impact that would have.
But we hope there will be respite soon. All right. Let's move on to another interesting story, which is that of the Federal Road Safety Corps, which is advocating for its personnel to carry firearms while on duty due to the increasing security challenges in the country. The Corps Marshal is proposing that henceforth Corps Marshals should be allowed to carry firearms. We've had these, too much of firearms in the system. Ideally, the police is supposed to provide internal security. When it comes to internal security, that should be the responsibility of the police. But there's this argument coming from the Corps Marshal that there's a need for its personnel to start carrying firearms. Sam, how will you react to this?
Yeah, personally, I'm against the call for them to carry. There's too much firearm in the country, and they can do their work in a civil manner, and I don't see there's any security threat to their own operations. Even some of their behavior on the highway sometimes doesn't show somebody that is providing safety, where they use vehicles to cross the road with a view to catching offenders. I don't support the call for firearms. Those are my personal views. I think we have too much.
For me, I even think it will be duplication of responsibility. You have the police, the civil defense, who has to ensure civil, compliance and obedience. Now, if there are needs to bring them in, maybe there are issues that have to do with security, then you allow the police to do their job. In fact, interestingly, the way it is now, you can have a synergy whereby if anything occurs, this personnel on ground, you can beckon on them to be of assistance. I don't see why we need to now giving them the permission to start wearing firearms. I don't think the issue has to do with firearms. It has to do with the fact that maybe there should be a proper collaboration between the FRSC and the police, and even if need be, the military, so that there will be fast response. Once there's a need for this personnel to come to their rescue, that can be done quickly. Yes,
you read my thoughts exactly, Ifem, because I was thinking along that line. Because when the FRS begins to bear arms and another agency is asking for arms, they all bear arms, what then happens? We've had cases of trigger-happy security officers. We do not want to have more of those things happening, because when people begin to bear arms and they do not have the training that is required to bear arms, because it takes a lot of emotional intelligence, you having your emotions in check to just bear arms, not just for you to know when to fire the arms. And if the reason is because they feel threatened to being on the highways, and they feel that Nigerians do not obey instructions on the highway. So you imagine what could happen at that time. But I think collaboration is the best solution.
I think we should invest in technology rather than requesting for firearm. I think the Nigerian state is over police. We don't need more firearm.
The use of firearm is not the problem, but the abuse that will come from it. Due to the fact that we've seen several examples, several cases, and this thing has to be checked. All right, let's see if the commercial will agree with you, Bless.
I agree with us.
All right, let's move on. There's a plan to promote autonomy for tertiary institutions in Nigeria. The federal government is proposing financial autonomy for tertiary institutions in Nigeria, a situation whereby federal institutions won't have to depend on the government. There's this fund called subvention where they get from either federal or the state government to fund their operations. And, you know, this call for the need for, you know, these institutions to start generating IGR. Of course, some of them are generating IGR. Perhaps the IGR is not enough to fund their operations and pay salaries. Sam, what do you think, financial autonomy for tertiary institutions in Nigeria?
I think the university system should be full autonomy, not just financial autonomy. But then the university authorities and management must look inward to improve on their financial drive through grants. Most universities outside our client have a big chunk of endowment funding, particularly from international government organization, grant-making organization. So it's key beyond just the government making that pronouncement. The university must look inward to generate their own fund, and these are research-driven. Endowments should be gotten from various agencies to support. So once the universities are fully autonomous and they're able to get funding, particularly from endowment, research grant, their level of autonomy will be greater than what currently exists. But it should just be beyond financial autonomy. It should be full autonomy for the university to be able to generate funds, generate their electricity and all that, and they're able to give back to society. More relationship between the TAN and GAN will help to sustain national development.
You think the full autonomy will help them to, you know, achieve the purpose of, you know, facilitating growth and development in that institution?
Yes, I think even the laws establishing the universities in the first instance, the university were supposed to be made autonomous of the supervising ministry or government agency that has responsibility or that has interface with them. So autonomy, yes, but the university management must be up and doing to be able to sustain those autonomy and get more grant into the system, particularly research grants, and we're able to compete globally with other universities. And in one of our programs recently, we talked about how some of the universities has improved in their ranking. So it's autonomy that can help to sustain those ranking.
Well, I think on the flip side, financial autonomy would mean more like having them run like private universities, which means that fees will go up for students. So I'm looking at the effect it will have on students of public universities. It's going to be very expensive to attend a public university when that happens, because the song we'll be hearing the lecturers or the universities sing then is that they don't get subvention from the government anymore. So it's difficult trying to run the school, so they need to jack up fees.
Yeah, and I'm really worried about that, because to an average Nigerian now, looking at the economic situation now, that won't be a good news if there's a need to increase school fees. But we must acknowledge one of the ways to generate funding is to, you know, through school fees and look internally, which are ways through to jack up the IGR. I think there's a need to also look for multiple streams of income for those universities, to stop a situation where you have this over-reliance on the federal government, just like state governments.
Yes.
They're relying on the federal allocation. So virtually every month you see them, you know, waiting for that money to be released and for them to be able to meet their expenses and administrative, you know, expenditure. But that shouldn't be the situation now for federal institutions, whereby they will be depending on the federal government alone. There will be corporate sponsorships. You have grants coming up. And then this also given for, you know, foreign universities and some private entities to come on board, to partner with them and be of help when it comes to helping their financial obligations.
Well, talking about IGR, a lot of universities have streams of income. Maybe it's time for them to begin to put them to use or flow them back into the school's coffers. They have businesses that they run.
I think just in addition to that, I think tuition is one of the smallest components in terms of university funding. So once universities are driven by research, then more grants will come into this environment and they can fund themselves more adequately. In South Africa, the volume of endowment to many of the universities are even greater than what they get from government.
All right, we'll go to another story. This has to do with technology and insurance, where industry experts and leaders have stressed the importance of collaboration, technological adoption, and integrating insurance into various sectors to drive insurance penetration in Nigeria. Now, industry experts are coming together and leaders, to advocate the need for technology, the introduction of technology and insurance to all sectors, to drive insurance penetration in Nigeria. How will you assess the attitude to insurance in Nigeria?
Generally, the attitude to insurance in Nigeria is very poor, but technology will enhance competitiveness in the insurance industry. So it's a welcome development that they are coming together to drive that process. We need insurance to help businesses in case there are crises with those businesses. At least insurance help to bring people to some level of comfort, not to profit, at least. So it's important that technology will be a major driver in terms of development in that sector.
Correct. Mason?
Yes, I think it's good, and it's high time people begin to see the need for insurance, particularly business people, because that's the wall on which you can rest when things go south without you even knowing that you're about to go south for your business.
Yeah. All right, let's take the train of our analysis to Kenya now, where President Ruto is planning to request $1 billion loan from China during his upcoming visit to Beijing. $1 billion loan. Requesting for loan is a universal concept. It's not a bad idea, but it depends on what you want to do with the loan. Several countries now, especially developing countries, are looking up to the developed countries for financial help or aid. And of interest is the fact that most African countries now find it convenient now looking in the direction of China for help. Chinese loan is becoming more attractive to more African countries now, and the need for this is for them to be able to develop the economic plans and infrastructure. So like I said, the idea of getting loan is not the problem. It depends on the plan you have on ground, what you're doing with it. Even developed nations, they obtain loans, which is needed for you to fund economic operations and some of your infrastructure development. But it depends on what you're using the loan for. If you're using it for recurring expenditure, which is not necessary, loans are meant to be used for investment, projects that can fetch you money and in the long term will make your economy better for it. So I think the President Ruto of Kenya is doing that part. What's your reaction to that, Sam?
Again, it's a welcome development to look to China for infrastructure loan. China is noted for providing soft loans, so to speak, to most African countries for development. And I think what William Ruto is looking out for in his visit to Beijing is to see how he can get that money to complete the road network, particularly in Nairobi, that have been stopped for a little while. And it was critical of the last president in terms of looking to China, even when he was the deputy president in Kenya. So what is key, once these loans are gotten and they are deployed appropriately for infrastructure development, I think it will be better for the country, and I'm sure they are able to pay. And if those roads are properly tolled in such a way that the money can come back and they can pay those loans. So for development purpose, I think it's key that the government get that kind of infrastructure loan from China.
According to the story, the loan will be used to complete store road projects, and Ruto will also seek a long-term repayment period for Kenya's existing debt. I think that's fair enough.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I also think that African countries too should be careful with the way they seek for loan from China. Remember that at a particular time, the IMF had also given a warning to Nigeria about that. They had concerns about the conditions that comes with the loans that they were getting from China. And so I think, yes, as much as China will be willing to give African countries loan, but the conditions that comes with the loan should be properly checked, so it doesn't seem like the future of Africans are being mortgaged through loans. And then to what the loans will be used for road projects, I don't know. I don't know how the government wants or will ensure the repayment of the loans once they're used for road projects. I think that's part of the reason why when loans are taken, the repayment plan is, or the repayment is really difficult, because they are channeled into things that do not necessarily generate money for the repayment. But if there's a way they want to commercialize the road, or there are things that would help in the repayment plan, then it's fine. It's not just enough seeking longer repayment time, but how do you intend to repay the loans?
Yeah. All right. The next story is about the outbreak of violence between Israel and Hamas. You know, the federal government has called for ceasefire and dialogue. You know, the attack, you know, being staged by Hamas, you know, is unprecedented. You know, thousands of people have been, you know, reported to be dead. You know, the hostility between, you know, Israel and Hamas, you know, Hamas is just the militant group who in recent times have been causing unrest, you know, and this particular attack is so phenomenal because the number of casualties that have been recorded. So the federal government is lending its voice to seek for dialogue and peaceful resolution. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's dialogue, but the crisis between Palestine and Israel has been there for a while, and we appeal to the West to be more responsible in the way they handle that hostility. Both countries must find a way to dialogue and to reduce the death toll that has occurred in the recent crisis. I think it's only dialogue that can resolve the issues, and we'll equally emphasize on justice in a way that both countries come back to the table and see how they can resolve their differences. This war has been there for too long a time. So we need more dialogue, and we appreciate Nigeria for their role in trying to see how dialogue can sustain the relationship between the two countries.
Let's look at air transport. What are the key milestones that have happened in that sector over the years? How has it evolved, air transportation in Nigeria?
All right, from a policy perspective, the National Transport Policy was initiated in 1965. We had another one in 1973. And the last one we have is 2008. Each of these policy initiatives provided for various means of transportation. Earlier in the program, you spoke about road transportation and the rail system. Each of these mode of transportation has their peculiarity. Air transportation has fared very well, but at a particular point in time, there were issues in terms of safety. There has been a tremendous improvement in terms of how the airspace is managed in Nigeria. There's still more to be done, but the operators in that industry are clamoring for subsidies to be able to sustain the operation, particularly from the point of view of the capital-intensive nature of that business. So far, so good. There are improvements, particularly in line with the ICAO regulations for that space.
How will you assess the patronage in recent times? You know, at a point there was safety concerns, but in recent times we seem not to have casualties. So how will you assess, you know, the level of patronage when it comes to that particular sector?
The level of patronage has improved tremendously, but the only critical problem in that sector, the fares have gone up astronomically to the extent that so many people cannot even afford air travel. But in terms of the safety of the airspace, we have done remarkably well in recent time. Improvements are being made. In terms of even the facilities at the airport, there are improvements. I think the airports are recalibrated in line with global best practices, and those environments are become more better than the way they were. On the other hand, there are challenges. Some people are clamoring for a national carrier. Whether there's a need for a national carrier, I think that's a different conversation entirely. But I think, by and large, there's a greater improvement in that space.
All right, let's look at the traffic situation of the airports. We have airports providing local, that is domestic flights and international flights in Nigeria. But we have about maybe just 3 specific international airports in Nigeria, even though we have some other airports named international airports, but we don't actually have those kind of services provided there, which increases the traffic that we see in airports, international airports such as the Lagos International Airport, the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja, and then the Port Harcourt Airport. Now, how can we ensure that there's maybe not even, but at least there's a good spread of the traffic to other airports, upgrading the infrastructure, upgrading the standards of the airports we have in Nigeria to international standards?
I think beyond the 3 airports you just mentioned, the other international airports that cater for the needs of, if you talk about the popularity and the volume of passengers on specific routes, then those key ones I just mentioned are there. The other ones, Kano has that kind of status. The other airports that has this kind of status as well. I think Asaba recently had that kind of status as well. So what is key is the volume of passengers that use those routes. But then there's a need to improve. But you know that venture is very expensive. Therefore, you need to have sufficient passenger for you to be able to extend those facilities. But then when you have those international routes, there's a need to improve on the current facilities so that the traffic congestion that you experience in some of those ones can be reduced minimally.
So what informs the decision on which international airport to use when a passenger wants to connect internationally from one country to the other? If we have different airports, what then is the decider or the deciding factor for passengers?
No, I think more first and foremost is the technical facility that are built in those airports that makes them international, to be able to have certain aircraft to fly that route. On the other hand, I think Port Harcourt, Lagos, and Abuja seems to be a kind of airport destinations for those who fly outside the country. So to that extent, it's important that the government needs to expand the route. But what is key is that those who are operating in those, is it commercially viable for them to go to those other routes? Those are the issues. So it has to do with commercial viability of the carriers and how they connect to their international routes.
All right, let's look at this issue of national carrier. You're aware of the politic in that trade, the last attempt to launch one. There's this argument that Nigeria needs one in order to be able to provide that identity. On the other hand, there's this argument that government doesn't have business in business. What's your take on this?
Well, the argument that government does not have business in business is highly debatable, but let's focus more on whether there's a need for a national carrier. There's a politics of it. Some people feel that it gives you a national brand identity. To that extent, okay. But then what happened to the national carrier that we had previously that was poorly managed? These are the issues that we need to resolve. But from my personal perspective, I don't think we have a need for a national carrier at this point in time. They should strengthen the policy regime so that more investors can come to play in those arena. But if you juxtapose that with some other national carrier, like the Kenya Airways, the Ethiopia Airways, South African Airways, maybe for the purpose of national brand identity, where there must be consideration. But if you ask the question, is Kenya Airways doing very well as we speak? Is Ethiopian Airline doing very well? Is South African Airline doing very well? These are conversations that we need to see whether there's a need for us to go into that venture. But by and large, like I mentioned earlier, if for the purpose of national branding, national identity, then the government may sustain that option.
Okay, still looking at the national carrier issue, would it just be a thing of national pride to have a national carrier, or it will solve the problem of high airfares for international travels if we have a national carrier? Because we know that when government goes into business like that, fares are sometimes subsidized. Look at the way airfares have increased, particularly for international travels, resulting to some Nigerians going to neighboring countries to board air flights to connect them for international travels because of how expensive the airfares have become. If we have a national carrier, do you think it would, to an extent, address that?
I don't think so, because even if you have a national carrier, it has to be competitive in terms of the current pricing regime. So to that extent, I don't believe that the pricing will be lower if you have a national carrier. They have to be competitive in line with other operators within the industry, because aviation fuel is priced the same thing. The taxation that you pay for airfare is priced the same way. So I don't think that will affect the commercial viability of that project if you don't operate competitively with other carriers.
It is obvious that airline owners now are going through hard times, due to high cost of operation, exchange rate, because it's a market that is dominated by foreign currency. Now, there's this argument or this advocacy for bailout. Maybe we'll call it subsidy this time around, but I'll use the word bailout, which is preferable. Do you think that is necessary?
In fact, within the policy initiative and framework, particularly the 2008 transport policy, one of the options there is that for you to be able to sustain air travel, there's a need for government to provide subsidies. That's what is in the policy framework, for them to be able to compete effectively. Because of the peculiarity of air travel, and this is a global phenomenon. So that sector is very sensitive, is not very profitable like any other form of transportation, but then is the safest way to travel. Therefore, government interventions globally are always at play in those sectors. Therefore, there's a need to provide subsidy regime for the operators to be able to do their business effectively.
All right, let's look at cargo and freight services. Still a service provided by the aviation sector. How does this support industries? Are there particular categories of goods that can be moved through this means of transportation?
Yes, I think this is the fastest way to move good across borders and boundaries. Some operators are dedicated to cargo airline for air freighting purposes. So that industry, to a very large extent, has become more viable in Nigeria because a lot of Nigerians who are in diaspora use some of those systems to take local produced goods abroad. To that extent, yes.
Let's look at the issue of repatriation of funds. This was an issue between, UAE and Nigeria until the president had to visit that country to resolve the issue. And it's still ongoing, where airlines have this issue of funds not being repatriated, especially in foreign currencies. How did we get here? And then what can be done to ensure that this issue is being tackled?
I think the government has to take that issues very seriously, particularly from the point of view of a scenario where you want to get foreign direct investment. And once people come to invest in your country and they are not able to repatriate their fund, then become a challenge to get new investors. Therefore, the government must, of a necessity, find a way to resolve the situation, allow airline operators to repatriate their funds, so that they can get pay their tax and they're able to operate more effectively, then to provide jobs, and at the same time government will earn its revenue. But then funds must be repatriated as at when due. That gives you some credibility in terms of the marketplace.
Now, the cost of airfares has made air travel a luxury option for travelers. But how key is air travel for economic development in Nigeria?
It has always been a luxury to travel.
At some point, the persons were
it's always been a luxury because the cost of flying is really expensive. Even when the prices were reasonably priced, it's still very high. But then, is the safest and the fastest means of communication. So for those who are in business activities who want to fly in order to meet up with their appointments, and the safe cost when you fly, and the safest. So therefore, it's key that we continue to have people who use that route to do their businesses.
Let's look at the issue of concession of airports. That's been, several arrangements over the year. You discover this government will come aboard, make an arrangement. Another government, in fact, presently, the minister is also thinking of going that route, concessioning the airports to bring efficiency. What will you expect to be, brought into that kind of agreement? What kind of level of transparency and standard would you expect from that kind of private partnership?
A private-public partnership is always a major driver in air transportation. Even the UK, where you have established systems, some of the big airports are operated by a private sector initiative. Therefore, concessionaire is a major contract arrangement within that air travel system. So the government must encourage and find a way to pull out in terms of airport operation. Once you're able to concession those airports, then service delivery efficiency is sustained. But to what extent is the PPP arrangement done in Nigeria? That's a different question entirely. So the Minister for Aviation and the Aerospace should be able to bring to bear his legal background to see how the concessional processes are done transparently and more accountable to the Nigerian public in order to safeguard the operation of that sector.
Now, the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, FAN, is responsible for managing airports in Nigeria. Now, what would you want to see in terms of improvement in security, safety, and overall service delivery? What would you want to see done by FAN to improve the way the airports are right now?
All right, first is to improve on the airport facilities first and foremost. In terms of safety, there's another agency, the Nigerian Civil Aviation Agency, responsible for safety in the air. But in terms of core management, they should free a lot of third-party personnel that launders around the airport. Then three, they should equally concession the service delivery to private sector initiative so that we have exceptional customer service to meet the aspirations of the flying citizen. And I think that's my personal view. They should concession more of those services. It should just be a regulatory authority so that we can get efficiency in terms of the way the airports are run.
All right, let's take a shift from aviation now to maritime. Let's look at the maritime sector, maritime transportation in Nigeria. How will you assess maritime transport in Nigeria, especially in the last 8 years? You've had one administration who have just handed over to another one. So let's accumulate it together and say in the last 8 years, how will you assess the maritime sector? What are the key issues and factors that have been popping as far as that sector?
There's a major challenge in terms of the maritime transportation sector, particularly when you talk about inland waterways. I think for us to improve in that sector, government needs to encourage a PPP arrangement. There's a need to dredge the inland waterway. That's a policy initiative. Need to dredge the inland waterway so that people can commute using water. In Lagos, for example, the Lagos state government have done well in that sector. You have some boats that commute between Lagos Island and Apapa. You have some that commute between Ikorodu and some other parts. So in that respect, particularly Lagos State, you're doing well, but the government need to open up the inland waterway. I do understand that the inland waterway is under the Blue and Marine Economy Ministry. So the new minister need to find a way to develop jetties, open up jetties, give more licenses for people to operate in that sector so that we can tap the potential of that sector to augment road transportation in particular.
You observed that recently that ministry was changed to Marine and Blue Economy. The concept of blue economy is not new, but you observe that the federal government is taking more keen interest in that. Why do you think that development is coming up now?
No, I think there are two sectors combined.
Yeah.
Blue economy has to do with the ocean resource. To what extent can
so why the interest in blue economy now?
No, I think that's a development initiative by this new administration to exploit ocean resources to the advantage of the country. On the other hand, when you talk about maritime, you're looking at the infrastructure, inland waterway, talking about the port systems and other marine issues that deals with the ocean or waterway, so that we can streamline the economy of scale that industry brings to bear in national development.
All right, let's look at port congestion. It's almost like the air travel where we have particular airports that passengers love to use. But for the ports, the Lagos port is the busiest around the country. So how do we address that issue and open up other ports around the country to ensure that they are used to full capacity and also improve infrastructure?
Well, people talk about the politics of ports administration in Nigeria. Why Lagos has been the cornerstone in terms of getting ships from other country bet in Lagos. If you look at the coastal environment from Lagos up to Calabar, the other seaports, so the government needs to have a deliberate policy to decongest the Lagos port in particular and find a way to strengthen the Warri, Sapele, Koko, Port Harcourt and Calabar port effectively to be able to decongest the Lagos airport. So in my view, if I was a public policy person, what needs to be done is to find a way to route shipment based on the areas of operation. So if you have big industry operating, for example, in Port Harcourt, some of those ships should be directed to Port Harcourt. If you have businesses around Calabar, that will be able to decongest the Lagos port. So there's a politics in port administration, but I think the government can resolve that to decongest the Lagos port. There are issues of security concern and piracy. So the Navy must up their game in terms of policing the water so that the Lagos port is decongested and people can use the other ports on the coastal line up to Calabar.
The major issue here is the high cost of doing business in these ports, especially at Apapa, due to delay, congestion, and most importers or exporters prefer that of Ghana and some neighboring countries. How do we address these issues of bottleneck, inefficiency in the system leading to high cost of doing business? You have, to even access the port, the access road is bad. How do we address this inefficiency in that sector?
I think, like I mentioned earlier, we need to look at the political economy of port administration. What the government needs to do as a deliberate policy is to find a way to look at those shipments come into this country, redirect the ship owners to berth in other ports. That will reduce the inefficiency, particularly the Lagos ports. Two, you need to encourage more investment in that sector. There's a need to review the 2008 National Transport Policy to accommodate some of these suggestions that we speak about now.
What are some of the emerging trends in the maritime sector that Nigeria is yet to take advantage, particularly for maritime transportation?
If you talk about inland waterways, there's a need to develop inland waterway transportation. There's a need to develop a kind of tourism hub around that sector, because if you go to other climes, there are a lot of development. You see the marina waterways is very empty. If you go to other places, you have some kind of tourism that is built around those sectors. Those are the kind of encouragement that we need to do here to provide incentive for those who want to invest in that sector. But in terms of a larger maritime business, number one, safety of the waterways in terms of piracy that has become a major challenge to seafarers, that's ship owners. Once those issues are addressed, then we'll be able to take advantage of the maritime economy optimally.
All right, there's this argument that it's important to reduce the number of government agencies at the port, whereby you see you have NAFDAC, you have Standard Organization of Nigeria, you have NDL, a lot of agencies. And there's this argument is also part of what is responsible for the bottleneck, the inefficiency, charges here and there. What's your take on the argument to reduce the number of government agencies at the port?
For me, I think the argument is not really the number of agencies. The argument is what is the efficiency and the kind of collaboration that exists between these agencies. Once you're able to streamline the operations at the port, I don't think it's a major challenge. But in an environment where people have overbearing influence because of their personal interests, in most cases, then it becomes a major challenge in terms of operation. So, like every port environment, you have all those agencies that are at play. But to what extent do you synchronize this operation to the extent that it doesn't affect service delivery? I think that's the conversation that we must have, that each of those operators within the port must streamline their operation, and there should be one bus stop where these services can be rendered, so that those who use those port services can, within 2-3 days, clear their goods, and that will impact positively on the economy.
All right, moving away from goods to conveying people from one place to the other. That's talking about passengers. We know that some persons use the water to move or move from one place to the other using boats, and even in rural areas you have canoes. But we've not seen a kind of intentional structure as we've seen government get involved or structure the road transportation, even rail transportation in the waterways. We still have a lot of boats provided by individuals, and that makes some persons scared of even using water transportation because of safety concerns and all. But how can we make it a very attractive means of transportation, not just for cargoes, but for people? In a place like Lagos, people can connect easily and faster using boat travels. So how do we make it more attractive for people to use and more safe as well?
Simply, I think the government needs to provide more incentive for a PPP arrangement in that sector. Number two, the National Inland Waterways that is responsible as an agency first and foremost, as a regulator, and even as an operator, must improve on the level of the fleets they have. Two, they need to build functional jetties that will make people to come to use those routes. But I do know that there are certain communities that are close to the water that use some of these waterways. But then we can improve in terms of the investment in those sectors. Therefore, the government must make a deliberate policy statement to drive investment in that sector so that it can complement road in particular, particularly in the coastal city, so that we can the travel time between cities, intra can improve upon.
Let's look at the plight of local ship owners, just like airline owners. They are going through hard time, just like an average business owner now. But the peculiarity about their own case is there's a special fund, designated for local ship owners called Cabotage Fund, to be administered by NIMASA in collaboration with some banks. But over the years, the money have accrued, but they've not been able to assess them. How do we continue to, how do we marry, this situation with the reality they are going through, and then what can government do to ensure that they have access to these funds, they apply it, can be made better by providing incentives for them?
I think simply dialogue and a scenario where bureaucracy does not allow certain things to go. Then those who operate in that industry must provide a sufficient advocacy so that they apply it in terms of the ability to access the funds is reduced.